Welcome to Three Men and a Mystery. I'm John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And this is episode 9 of season 2, Silenced, the Death of Elisa Gomez. On the last episode, we started our interview with Sarah Cailean. She's back so that we can go over more information about Brad's criminal background and some other stories that maybe don't show up in that criminal background. Let's continue with Sarah. Well, getting back to the list, let's continue. Brad's criminal history, August 5th, 2010. Looks like he decided that he was going to buy some liquor for someone that was under the age of 21. Mm-hmm. They convicted him of that, and they're calling it a gross misdemeanor.
Yeah, probably because he's got other alcohol-related stuff already.
Yeah.
Or it may be that there was some other stuff associated with it that we don't see here in the final version. Because it doesn't even necessarily just mean buying. It doesn't, we always think of a kid standing outside a store, giving somebody money going, hey, will you go buy this for me?
Right.
It may well be that he was serving to people at home, or if he was dating somebody younger and got her drunk and her parents complained, something like there's an endless list of possibilities of what that could cover.
Sure.
But obviously he's got other alcohol related stuff, so that's going to be enhanced.
Yeah. Even the charge defines it's saying purchased, sell, barter, furnish, or give to someone under the age of 21. So that's a pretty wide.
As a convicted felon, I'm wondering why it's a misdemeanor. It seems like it should be a felony.
He might not no, because some charges you can't enhance up to felony, and usually alcohol related ones are among those. And as messed up as this is going to sound, those DV charges on him, I don't think any of them were felony. When it was a gross, like most DV charges are the maximum. Oh no, you know what? I take that back, because when I did look, the strangulation one enhanced it to felony. So you're right.
Yeah.
That would have been a felony conviction. But generally, that's why it's so great that they do have that separate enhancement for strangulation, because otherwise, even really serious incidents of violence, with broken bones and stuff like that, are not necessarily always a felony, unfortunately.
Yeah. I also just want to call out in terms of alcohol that when they were fighting through their text messaging and they were threatening to break up, it was a regular trend that he would be like, well, I'm going to come by so I can get the rest of my alcohol. Or, I'm upset that you were always hiding alcohol from me. Or, hey, wasn't that bottle of mine full? And there was even points where Elisa is trying to negotiate with him. She's like, hey, go take this bottle from over there and I'll just buy a new bottle and put it there. I mean, it was such a focal point for him. And it was a focal point in their relationship. You could see from very early on that he must have been either trying to really sober up, or at least giving her the illusion that he was trying to sober up, because they talked about different ways to control it. And I believe he was being tested. There's certain tests they can do, right, Sarah? If you're in a program, some type of chemical test where they can see if you've been consuming alcohol? Oh,
yeah. If he's in a program, he may have to go get regular testing at a lab.
Yeah.
And I would tend to think it's probably, this is a guy who is still relatively young and so far has indicated in no other fashion that he is learning from any of his mistakes.
Right.
So I would guess that, your speculation that it may have just been play acting in the early stages of their relationship is probably spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the tone just changes so dramatically, of course. I understand when people are in a fight, it's not your best self, but
right.
There was certainly a trend that was always going back to that.
Right.
Him being himself again.
And I think part of it is, in addition to just being a bad guy, he's sort of a grifter. He's sort of working this relationship or these different relationships, but especially with Elisa, and trying to work the situation to portray a certain image, even though we know this is who he really is right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and in her own words, when she was speaking to a friend about it, she kind of described him as, I know he's had a couple DUIs, but he's a nice guy and he's trying to work on himself. But I don't think she knew about the domestic violence stuff. I don't know if she knew about a charge we haven't talked about yet, which is animal abandonment, which I'm sure would have been a big warning for her, because she was using him to help run her business effectively of taking care of dogs. But let's go ahead and continue. So July 6th, 2012, we get another driving related. It looks like he's speeding, going 49 in a 30, and he doesn't have proof of insurance when he's pulled over. I'm wondering if his driver's license is even back at that point or not. They don't.
It probably is.
Yeah.
Because one, it looks like it probably would have also charged him with no license.
Right.
Because traffic stuff is the stuff that, honestly, if you really want something to stick, you kind of have to almost stack it as much as possible because so much of it will get dismissed.
Yeah.
But he at that point, I mean, how many we're years out from the DUIs, at least the ones that are on here.
Sure.
So he probably has his license back at that point.
A few months after that, we get another one where it looks like he left the car parked somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. Is that a fair assessment of the one in September?
Yeah, stopping, standing, parking where signs prohibit. That's probably just a ticket.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then speed exceeds posted limit, and that is December of 2013. It keeps going on. June of
the greatest hits.
Yeah.
It's a real winner.
Man.
Well, I've got a few speeding tickets on mine. Okay, just like three.
I do too.
Okay.
I do too. And some parking ticket. I live in Philadelphia, the home of Parking Wars, the reality show about the parking people. So
right.
I'm no stranger to parking tickets, but I don't have any domestic violence or any DUIs or anything like that.
That's what and look, everybody has sped or speed. Some people get busted for it, some don't. I mean, the speeding tickets you could almost dismiss.
Sure.
The DWIs. I mean, some people are hardcore alcoholics or have a disease, and even if you wanted to try and dismiss those as a disease that he has, okay, I'm willing to give that to you if that's your argument, but. The bottom line, the multiple times that we see he's putting his hands on women, when you're growing up as a young man, one of the first lessons you learn from somebody in your life, whether it's your grandfather, your uncle, your dad, whoever, is don't ever touch a woman. Don't ever hit a girl. Don't ever put your hands on a woman. It's driven into your head as common sense. So even if you sort of dismiss and take that other stuff away and say it's explainable, that you're still left with that. And this is a history of that on more than one occasion with more than one woman.
Right. Well, and that's just the way it goes. Unfortunately, you're going to be hard pressed to find a case where some guy really only ever struck or assaulted a woman in a relationship once and then, learned and never did it again. And it was, and in that sort of a situation, you probably wouldn't have seen a charge.
Yeah.
This is when when AJ goes because she's been strangled and assaulted badly and in fear for her life. Honestly, if he took the phone and she couldn't call 911, she's having a panic attack, which already feels like you're dying when that happens. She was terrified and terrorized. And that is that's not a one-off. Nobody does that as a one-off.
Yeah. Yep. Now we get this charge of animal abandonment in June of 2014. Sarah, can you tell us more about that type of charge? What could have happened around that?
Well, what that strikes me as is the animal, especially because the original, when I looked at this one, I looked at the case, dug into the case itself, and it looks like the original call or the original contact with law enforcement was from a veterinarian. So I think that he probably brought an animal that he had into the vet under the pretense of getting something done, like, it needs vaccines or it's injured. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't specify in the thing if the animal was injured.
Sure.
But he leaves the animal at the vet and then never comes back for it. So the vet then is compelled to report it because he can't keep the animal. He can't turn the animal in to be destroyed. Probably legally, but I would imagine just morally either. Right. And so he's got to bring the police into it. And so that's what that is that he abandoned the animal at a vet's office.
I mean, is that at least a slight thing in his favor? At least that he brought the animal to the vet
help.
and Yeah, he didn't like just dump it off in the woods and take off somewhere.
Well, there's
I'm
shelters.
trying to find something. All right.
Yeah, you're trying hard, Gray, and I don't know that you made it on that one.
Well, and I would also imagine if he brought it to a vet, it probably had some sort of injury. And if it was, it's also just as easy if you really care about the animal, but you're like, I can't afford these charges or whatever. It's just as easy to say, I found this dog. It looks like it had been hit. I found this cat that, something's wrong with it.
Right.
And say to the vet, this is not mine. I'm only bringing it here, because I'm concerned that it is going to die in pain.
Right.
A vet, whether they believed you or not, probably wouldn't turn you in. I mean, this is just speculation, but I would imagine you wouldn't turn somebody in on that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I know you guys probably get this too. You hear from a lot of people but if there's an animal involved that's somehow being harmed or hurt, that's just as bad to many of audience listeners as a person being hurt.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot.
Enormous red flag. Yeah. And you hear it a lot. And it is one of those things that's now like in the public discourse. It's sort of like, oh, everybody knows it, but it's also true because those two things can be mutually exclusive. Right. But people who harm animals will harm people. Like that's all there is to it.
Yeah. A month after that, July of 2014, we get back to a DWI. And on this one, he says the blood alcohol concentration was 0.08, but that was within 2 hours, I guess, of when they actually picked him up. So,
that's interesting. Yeah, because most states now, the legal limit has been dropped to 0.08. I think if you want to get federal aid money, like highway aid money and stuff, you have to have a 0.08 as your max at the state level. It used to be 0.1 in most places.
Right.
And then federally it went to 0.08. And so then all these states had to follow suit if they wanted to continue to get federal funding. So yeah, they're saying he's right at the legal limit, but if it took them that long to get the test done, then they're acknowledging that he was probably higher at the time of the stop.
And is that an indicator that he wouldn't do a breathalyzer and they had to take him in somewhere?
Well, so the way a breathalyzer works, they have the little ones that are handy dandy at the road.
Yeah. That
is really just a tool for the officers in that moment to kind of know what they're dealing with and try and get a screenshot of the worst of it at the thing. Most states, I don't believe that stands on its own. At least when I was an officer, that one you couldn't use that in court.
Okay.
So what you have to do, they always have to be tested. If it's a breathalyzer, if they get a blood alcohol content, it's either through blood, which would have to be done at a hospital, which actually this might be that. It might be that he ended up being taken to the hospital and they compelled him to do it. But usually that requires a warrant. But to do the actual breathalyzer test, which is this great big machine, that has to be done at a station. So okay. There are a million different reasons that it could. There are a million different reasons that it could have a 2-hour delay. It might just, it might have been they were fighting with him. It might have been that there was a crash involved.
Right. And on that one, it looks like it was a felony. It was pushed up to a felony as well. Is that because of his history? Yeah,
I would imagine it had to be at that point. Like they probably, if we look at the laws, they probably have so many within a decade is automatic enhancement.
Is it safe to say that he's lost his license we know is at least suspended before because he was caught driving without a license. Is it safe to say after this third one that he lost it permanently or for 20 years or something like that?
No, it's unfortunately not safe to say that.
Wow. I wish. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It all
scary.
Depends. Again, it varies state to state. And I can't emphasize enough that I don't want to sound like an expert on a state's laws that I never studied. Yeah. But that being said, in most places, it's very difficult to lose a license permanently. Unfortunately. Yeah. Some people just.
And then eventually that kind of person hits a family head on and the question's asked, why was he even driving?
Why was he driving?
Boggles my mind.
Well, I can tell you, this is 2016 that this is going on. And of course, a few months after this is when he meets Elisa and that whole text chain kicks on. And I'm certainly getting the impression from the text chain that he doesn't have his license at that point because he's worried.
Right. And also the conviction of the felony means that was probably why he was having to do testing, regular testing.
And just remind me, John, wasn't the way that he met her was because she was trying to get to drive people for extra money?
Yeah, exactly. She was doing kind of like her own Uber service where she would just post on Craigslist that, hey, if you need a ride, $10 one way or something.
So that DWI history probably leads to him losing his license and needing to get rides someplace, and opens the door for this scenario.
Yeah,
there was a pretty large gap between the DUIs. You've got I think it was 2014, and the previous one was what, 2006 or so.
Yeah,
but that's the times he was caught.
Yeah, that can be pure luck, or he didn't have access to a vehicle. I mean,
that's what it seems like.
He's not a super upstanding citizen where it's like, oh, he just goes to the dealership and gets the latest version of whatever,
And his friends probably aren't quick to lend him their
cars.
vehicle.
And he'd been pulled over though many times though. It was almost a miracle looking at all these other times that he was pulled over and he wasn't drunk. You wonder if he sort of learned when to sort of avoid being caught drinking, because there is an 8-year gap where it was so consistent before that.
He's definitely in the text chains that I've seen, he is thinking about things like that. Like there's one vehicle he doesn't want to drive because he's worried he's more likely to get pulled over in it, and then they're going to find out he doesn't have a license.
Interesting.
So yeah, I've seen a few things that would certainly indicate that he's aware of certain systems and he's trying to move around them.
Yeah.
July of 2016, drinking in public places, and that conviction is deemed a petty misdemeanor. Do you have any insight on that? Is that like him just being drunk at a park?
Well, it's probably not being drunk at a park as much as it is drinking in a park, or whatever, walking down the street. Just sort of general open container laws is what most people think of them as, and almost every place in the country has them. Depending on where you are, it may be strictly enforced or it may not.
Okay.
Well, and he has to do this because now he can't drive anymore to do it. So he's got to walk around town.
So now he's drinking and walking. Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, we know Elisa passes away in October of 2016. A few months after that, December 23rd, 2016, he has a charge for fleeing a peace officer in a motor vehicle. I believe that's actually Elisa's vehicle, at least according to what I've heard from the family. And he's convicted of a felony for that one. So he's running away from cops?
Yeah. And and that's not unusual if he knows he doesn't have a license and he knows it's going to be a felony anyway, probably for him driving at that point.
Right.
And he may have been drunk at the time as well, which is going to make it that much worse. So he's going to run. And that's also the reason that so many departments have the policy of not chasing, because if it's going to turn out, like you risk everybody's life, the officers, civilians on the roadway, once you enter into a chase. And generally they've already got the tag. They're already going to be able to find who the guy is. Let's not get anybody killed over the dude not having a license and running from the cops.
Is this one of those charges that you can there's wiggle room of what he did that leads to you saying he fled? Let's say you pull him over and then he pulls forward 20 feet and you go, oh, he tried to flee, and then that counts.
No, I can't. Well, I can think of one officer I knew who might make that claim, but every department's got at least one. But no, for the most part, he's evading. Like, this officer probably lit him up to try and make a traffic stop, and he took off. So 20 feet, no, but even a few blocks, yeah, you might get dinged on that. But if I remember correctly, he totals the car, or he crashes it, right? That's why.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe he crashed the vehicle, and then and that's the thing is, let him crash by himself. Don't have the department involved in it. I'm sure they probably at that point already have the license on camera. They've got him fleeing on camera. Most cruisers, once you activate your lights, your camera comes on.
Right.
So the second you go to make a stop, everything's recorded.
Regarding this last charge, I'm assuming if there's a DWI associated with it, we'd see that on there.
Not if they didn't write him for it, or if they wrote it and it got thrown out before it even went to the judge. Because fleeing is pretty significant. Now, the fact that he didn't go to jail for that, on top of everything else in his history, is frustrating, but not unusual.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give you a moment to comment on that, because the family has really talked to me a lot about the fact of like, how can this guy go through all this and do all this? And it seems like he just gets slapped on the wrist. And like, I think for that one in particular, if I remember correctly, the judge was like, oh, we understand that you just lost your wife. And, you know, it turned into like a $50 fine or something.
Yeah.
How does this happen?
It happens because the court systems are stacked and the jails are stacked. And I know that there's been a lot of speculation that maybe he was some sort of an informant or something. And that's always possible. But what I'm looking at, it's one of those things that as an officer would have made me very frustrated, but not terribly surprised.
Right.
If I'd walked out of that courtroom and that was what he got out of it. So I don't think that it's necessarily signifying that he's some great CI, like giving them information on people. I think he kind of gets lucky. At that point, he gets a judge who all the judge sees on paper is that his wife died, or probably his defense attorney introduced it immediately. Oh, he's so upset because his wife just passed. And a judge thinks he's being kind, you know? He doesn't know necessarily all the backstory to it. So, I don't think it's indicative of anything more nefarious with officials.
Okay. Well, that was the end of the reports, at least for the state of Minnesota. But Sarah, I'm going to drop something on you. Maybe you don't even know about this one.
Okay.
In August of 2017, Bradley would actually make the news again, this time in Oklahoma. According to News 12, he and a new female friend entered a home without permission while high on meth and allegedly smoked the drug in front of two small children. When deputies arrived, and get this, the house that they were at actually belonged to a deputy that worked in a neighboring county. But when the deputies arrived for that county, they found the woman and her two children hiding behind the house, but Brad had left them behind. They eventually caught him at a bar down the road.
Of course they did. So the woman that he goes into the house with, it's her two children.
Yeah, and it's such a strange story because there is the son, I guess, lives there of the deputy and his wife. And the son is like 23 years old, and he calls his mom and he's like, did you tell some people they can move in? Like, they literally show up and they're just carrying clothes into this house.
Jesus.
And he's like, his mom's like, no, I didn't tell them that they can move in. You know, call the cops, get someone down there.
It sounds like they're what's that called when you go onto a property that's not being lived in and you live there for a little bit?
Squatting. It sounds like, right. Yeah, but they're going to attempt to squat. I mean, if it's a deputy's house, it's probably a perfectly normal, nice house where you're going to, you're going to know that people live there. You can't really squat in some place that you are aware is occupied. That's just called burglary.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't, I wasn't aware of that. I did see something about him in Oklahoma and I just didn't, I apparently must have missed that.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, that speaks to meth. There's a lot of, hallucinations and stuff like that involved with meth. He may well, I had a guy one time, drunk passed out in his vehicle that he had sort of crashed into this woman's yard. And he was adamant that he was at his apartment complex. Now, this was a subdivision, like this is a big green lawn in front of a home. And he's like, no, I am in my parking spot of my condo, like in an apartment complex 30 miles away. Like once somebody is intoxicated enough, either alcohol or meth, what they believe is sometimes it's possible that they believe something wildly different. So he may well have thought he was at somebody different, house, like the house of a meth person. There's still a lot of meth use in Oklahoma. It never really left there. The way it's sort of back on the rise nationwide, it never left certain areas of Oklahoma. So he may have ended up down there through meth connections, and then he's either high or drunk and thinks, oh, great, I've got a place to crash. And it just happens to be a cop's house.
Yeah. And it's pretty interesting that in the interview, he talks about someone that's being there as a meth head, almost like it's a derogatory term. And, here we're finding out he's smoking meth with his new girlfriend.
So I'm wondering why there's not more charges. Anytime I hear about these kind of meth heads that do this with kids involved, isn't there any kind of grounds to get this guy for endangering children or anything like that? Add charges like that to it?
There is a possibility, but endangering children is difficult if the children are not directly in your custody, right? So they may well have, I don't know without looking at it, if they charge the mother of the small children, they probably would have been more likely to charge her with that, or charge them both and then his were dropped, something like that. Not always, but oftentimes it's the actual caregiver of the children who the state deems responsible for this, for this breach.
Yeah, that's one of the most tragic things that we hear about is the kids that are the toll it takes on these children, or you hear about them overdosing because they don't know any better. They're drinking I just read an article about somebody drinking the mom's meth bong water, whatever that is. I don't even know what that is, and dying from that. It's a whole nother podcast for another day, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
A lot of us struggle with finding happiness, dealing with tough life issues, and so much more. But you don't have to struggle alone, and you don't even have to leave your home to get the help you need, thanks to BetterHelp Online Counseling.
BetterHelp is available on desktop or mobile for both Android or iOS. You can speak to a counselor via text, chat, phone, or video.
Find secure, convenient, professional help that's affordable with BetterHelp.
BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, but you can find licensed professional counselors that you can speak to from the comfort of your own home.
3 Men and a Mystery listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code 3MEN. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/3men. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/3men. Find help to break through those personal obstacles with BetterHelp. Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further and honoring the life of Elisa Gomez. So please show them the same support they're showing us. So I have a couple of other notes that actually came from Sergeant Villela's report, kind of her summary report that they kicked over to the DA. She stated in there, I received a telephone call from Joe Pasusta, a prior boss of Brad Alexander. Now, I know we've been trying to get in contact with him. Gray, you haven't had any luck on that, have you?
No.
Okay.
Not.
We get plenty of information here about him. He stated that Brad had dated another coworker. She told Joe that Brad had tried to strangle her in the past. They reached out to the ex-girlfriend directly, and she told an investigator Brad had been physical with her in the past. She stated Brad had choked her by putting his hands around her neck and also had pushed her off of a chair. She never reported these assaults to the police. Sergeant Villela spoke to another ex-girlfriend of Brad Alexander. She was living with Brad as boyfriend and girlfriend when Brad met Elisa. She stated she had met Brad on Plenty of Fish. She describes her relationship with Brad as him being controlling, jealous, and physically abusive. With all that being said, we've got a big problem with this case, largely due to the physical evidence. Now, the medical examiner won't flag this case as a suicide, specifically stating, cannot exclude potential injury by another person. Sarah, I know you have a friend that's a coroner, and she's reviewed some of the information from this case. Can you tell us about her conclusions?
Yeah. So my best friend is a coroner, which is very helpful for me when I get asked to talk about some of these things, because I definitely don't have the skill set or the expertise to look at autopsy photos and make these kinds of determinations. So when I looked at them, and I know you've talked a little bit about the details in previous episodes, there were a couple of things that jumped out at me as wanting to ask her about, not necessarily that I thought one way or the other that they were, signs of anything, but that seemed to me logically to speak to something, right? So one of them was the location of the actual indentation from the scarf or whatever she was hung with. And it seemed in a place to me on the neck that I thought, boy, that looks more like where you would put your hands rather than where you would put a rope. And my friend who looks at these every day said that that's actually not the case. She was very clear that the location was exactly right for death by hanging.
But
also
you were
had some
talking about the furrow pattern in particular,
the
right?
furrow pattern, right,
Okay.
right. Like how, like where it's placed. I thought, boy, if you were reaching around to strangle somebody, that you would go up high like that, right?
Right.
And I sort of thought if you were gonna tie a scarf around your neck or a rope or something in order to die by suicide, that you would, I guess, assume to put it lower. But
Sure.
I don't have a personal or professional history of that, so I really couldn't speak to it. And she said that no, it looked pretty standard.
Okay.
She also said, I asked her specifically about something you and I, Lorden, have talked about off air, about the lividity, the red in her legs.
Yeah.
And what she said, based on looking at it, was that we always hear about rigor, but what we don't often hear about is something called livor, Livor. And that's actually where the lividity is setting. In the same way that we think of rigor as like, okay, now that it's all stiff, the liver is where it's like, okay, this is the final resting place where the blood has sort of pooled. And that before liver, the blood is still possibly like moving around a lot. And so she said that I had the same thought that you guys had talked about in earlier episodes, where it looked like maybe she was seated but tipped over, or something to where it was like the back of her legs had blood pooled. What she said in looking at it is that it did sort of look as though the body had been positioned in such a way that it had a slight lean to it, and that then would have put some of the blood into the front of the legs like that if they were sort of tipped at that front angle. And then, as they cut her down and she's down, that it's still sort of moving around, so that it's not unfortunately settled in such a way where it can say one way or the other.
Okay.
And now that being said, she had the same response that it would be difficult, especially without her actually having access to the body, only doing photos in the report, to make a declaration one way or the other as suicide or homicide. And I know that she has cases where she has made that same call many times.
Sure.
So, her impression was that it looked just from the photos like it was straight up. But that there certainly is room for, there's room for other theories with more knowledge, right? Like, I know there's all these questions about that purple scarf and why wasn't it cut? And it's like, what exactly was the instrument
right.
that took her life?
Well, that's kind of what I'm wondering is, I think the furrow pattern is going to make sense, because I don't doubt that she was hung up there. I think the question is, could she have been strangled before that? But now you're talking about in a way that didn't leave any of its kind of own marks or damage, her hyoid or other easy indicators.
And the muscles in the essentially in the throat area and stuff like that. Absolutely. Now, I guess if you put somebody up, if you were the one holding that, the instrument, whatever, it was a rope or if it was that scarf or whatever, if you're the one holding it in place, and she's hanging, then everything's going to look like a suicide.
Right. And let me just make a clarification, because we got new information. We didn't have those autopsy photos and some other evidence photos that we've gotten since. The scarf actually was cut by the team when they collected it as evidence. We've got a new picture I'm going to share here for the YouTube audience where you can see where they cut it, and they actually kept the knot intact. So previously, due to written reports, we thought that it wasn't cut because that's what they described in the reports. But there is a cut that the team made to actually get it down. And you can also see there's a little bit of dirt where the scarf was wrapped around the actual beam up there.
But how did Sharon get her down? If not by taking the scarf off of the beam.
I don't get that. Yeah, I still don't understand that.
Without her DNA being on.
Well, with toenail clippers, those work great for that.
Yeah, it's the toenail clipper story, and I still don't quite understand it. And we keep going through. Sharon will kind of reach out, and we'll have a little bit of contact with her, and she'll say that we're going to line something up, and then it just doesn't happen. That's just kind of been the pattern with her, unfortunately. Sarah, you did such good research. I just wanted to thank you for taking all this time and listening to the episodes. I know you had a specific point of view that you wanted to talk about in terms of when Elisa had posted on Facebook about a drawing she found from years before that looked like Brad, and a dream that she had where she didn't know if she was supposed to run away from him or run to him. And then after her death, he replied to that post and said, more like, look out. You had a different point of view on that. You want to share that with us?
Well, I definitely. So when I was listening to the episode where you guys discussed that, and you said, it kind of seems like it might be this or it might be that, and I just wanted to introduce a sort of a third possibility that jumped out at me at the time, especially because at this point I was trying to play devil's advocate, right? Like if it really is purely a suicide and she was not, pushed into it by him being present in the room, which behaviorally there are all sorts of questions. Again, having somebody else actually take her down, all the, the discovery, stuff like that is questionable. Also, his dropping to his knees on the lawn in front of the police. Yeah. Feels, I guess I'd love to see the footage.
We'll have to do that someday because I've got it. And I think you'll have an interesting take on that.
Trying to sell it.
Yeah, I'm very quick to say that I never question, you can't in a moment question somebody else's grief. Grief looks different for everybody.
Sure.
However, sometimes you can just feel performative grief when it's happening. Yeah. And the idea of dropping to the knees when it's already like, it's not the moment that he found out. It's not like the police said, hey man, we found your wife, she's dead.
Right.
Even that would feel a little weird, but it would be more of like when you see somebody drop to their knees, it's because like the adrenaline that's coursing through their body, they actually lose control of the legs. It's like almost like a shaking so much that you go down.
Yeah.
That's why I want to see the video because I tend to think it probably didn't look like that.
Yeah. But he's in so much grief, but yet he had told, what did he tell Sharon when he had found her hanging?
Go down and
cut. Bitch is dead or
cut her down.
Bitch is dead, cut her down, whatever the statement was.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's not upset then, but when the police show up, he's dropping to his knees.
Exactly. He's lost control of his limbs. At any rate, but the only thing I was trying to, again, play devil's advocate and just say, as my coroner friend said, like, it may well be that it was a straightforward suicide and she just was married to a really awful person. Right. we're certainly not.
As a minimum.
As a minimum, right.
Yeah.
And I would say that even in light of that, it's very possible he would have gone on to kill her. But all of that being said, when he said the line about, or look out, I agree that it could mean that he saw himself as her needing to have warning about him, but not necessarily in this sort of evil henchman, twisting his mustache kind of way, like, or look out, you guys all know I killed her, but in much more of this sort of narcissistic making it about him. Right. So in those days after, he's going to make it all about like, oh my God, poor me. I lost my wife. I'm falling to my knees and this is all so hard. And that if he is an actual like clinical narcissist, he's thriving on that attention. He loves that people are feeling sorry for him. Right. And that lookout thing is to me indicative of this like seeming like, oh, I let her down and everybody tell me how great I am because I let her down and I'm feeling so terrible. It just, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not articulating it really well, but
I think you're talking about it in like in almost like a sympathetic way. Like,
yes, like he knows it's not that I killed her, but that it's my fault she's dead. And
right.
I'm I'm so broken up over the fact that I was bad for her.
That's an interesting take on it. Yeah. And
Right,
especially because it's a public post too. Yeah.
Exactly. It's sort of that vague booking thing that most like normally functioning healthy people are so annoyed by when somebody posts about too much drama, don't even ask, this kind of thing where you're all like, oh God, now I'm supposed to ask, that's what it feels like is him saying like, oh, I'm such a terrible person. Somebody tell me I'm not a terrible person.
Right.
Right. And just making his wife's death about him.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, we really appreciate your expertise and your time on this.
Sure.
And before you go, I have to ask, can we put you on the spot and tell us what you think happened here?
I think I'm a little like Lord, and it sounds so bad to say, but where I kind of go back and forth because this is somebody who will continue to be very violent and controlling with partners in his life. And it's entirely possible that there's a scenario where he strapped something around her neck and hung her up there. It's also possible that she had suicidal ideations that she had not shared with other people. And that in a moment of just absolute despair over maybe having made a choice she was already regretting, being sad, feeling abandoned by him, that in that moment she made a decision that unfortunately her, she can't take back. I guess I lean slightly more on the suicide versus homicide. But I also believe he is more than capable.
It's been, I'll tell you what, for I can't speak for Gray and John, for myself though, it's been hard to stay sort of neutral, and not come to conclusions.
Yeah. And it's so funny though, because as these sorts of cases go, just when I think I've kind of landed squarely on a conclusion, a piece of evidence or a new conversation comes to light and you think, man, that really feels like the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've explained every episode that we've been doing on this. Yeah. It just keeps pushing my meter. It's
so hard for her family to have to live with that wondering.
Yeah. I mean, every single episode you start going, wow, I don't like this guy more and more and more, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that nothing's changed in terms of the forensics to us to be able to say, oh, wow, now it's
right. And the other thing too is it's so difficult to imagine him as sort of a criminal mastermind.
Mm-hmm. I see. I have a different take. I get the impression he wasn't. I get the impression that if the cops had accused him that night and maybe put some pressure on him, he might have cracked and admitted to something that night. Just my feeling about it. Had they put pressure on him?
Yeah, there were definitely signs in his interview with detectives that night that were, again, indicative of narcissistic personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that when NPD is coupled with violent tendencies, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and it had just the mystery. That's the most frustrating part of this case is here you have a guy with a record of, one that we can see plus one that other women have called in the report is also true, that he's got this history of hurting women. And how does he do it? The neck. Right. That's his go-to. And then his wife dies the day he marries her. Something happens with her neck. It's hard not to get consumed in that. Who
likely doesn't know that history with him, by the way. Right. I really doubt that she knew about that. And I'm still caught up on this thing about why are her pants off? One of his assaults in particular has to do with him wanting sex and him being interviewed by the police. He's sure to interject that, hey, I'm not going to get in trouble because, it was our wedding day and we had sex.
He also does this thing where he keeps trying to make it clear that she's he's saying, oh, I'm not disparaging her, but he's basically shitting all over her. In the interview with the police to try and steer the look as much onto her as being somebody who was unstable.
All right. Well, we're going to let you go, Sarah. Thank you once again for your time. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll see
Thank you,
soon.
Sarah.
Thank you. It's amazing how prevalent this domestic violence is, though. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad she's calling that out because I know it's definitely putting a little bug in my brain about how I can be better about talking about that stuff on the channel.
I always try and do in October. I always try and do a case about domestic violence.
Yeah.
Just to put it out there that, hey, it's Domestic Violence Month, everybody. So you're aware.
Well, the thing is, I do a show, so a lot of the people send me stuff, so I do like sometimes 4 or 5 different stories in a night. Just go over them, and I'd say, gosh, I mean, every night there's something related to that. It's crazy. There are so many murders, boyfriends killing, some girl's pregnant, guy doesn't really want it, so he kills her instead. The whole thing. It's crazy all the time.
That was Sarah Cailean. If you would like to follow Sarah Cailean on Twitter, you can do that by following at CAILEANSARAH. Sarah Cailean, thank you once again for your time. Also, if you do think that you are suffering from domestic violence or you know someone that is and you're looking for resources and help, be sure to visit www.thehotline.org. You can also call 1-800-799-7233. They also have an option where you can text that number or you can come to the website. You can chat with a counselor right there on the website. Also, remember, if you are struggling with thoughts of ending your own life, please do not hesitate. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. It's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That goes the same for the National Domestic Violence Hotline as well. So these are amazing services, and I really appreciate having them.
Yeah, and please join us on the finale live stream on Wednesday, April 8th at 6 Pacific, and that's PM, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern on my channel, Gray Hughes Investigates, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell.
You can find out more about the show at www.threemeninamystery.com. And if you're planning on coming to CrimeCon Orlando on May 1st through the 3rd to meet us and many of your other favorite podcasters and YouTubers, remember to use code 3men20 and you will save 10% off on your admission.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, you can send them to us via email at 3meninamystery.com. Again, those are with the number 3s. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter with the handle at 3meninamystery, again with the number 3. Or you can find us on Facebook by searching for the podcast.
3 Men in a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
Now that you've heard from and about the major players in this case, we need to see what we've learned this season and how this case moves forward. With only a few episodes left, we're lining up more experts and we'll be opening up even more about the background investigation that's been going on and what's being found and figured out. If you think that you know everything there is to this story, buckle up. We've got a lot more coming your way. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I'm John Lorden.
Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.